Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Smooth Podcast. Here to the left of me, I have Gonzalo Cuervo. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Not too bad. I want to start this off a little different. I first want to say thank you so much for coming, especially on such short notice, and I'm really honored to have you here. The second thing is I want all the viewership to know that, I asked his team if there was anything off limits, and they actually said no. So that's, I guess, very rare for a politician to be like, ask me whatever. So I really appreciate that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I appreciate you inviting me, and the truth is, look, a big part of my brand is being authentic. What you see is what you get. Mm-hmm. I'm not performative. I'm not trying to be somebody else. I'm not trying to prove that I'm the smartest person in the room, that I have all the answers.
Right.
I'm just a guy who's lived a lot. Right. And who is trying to live my best life possible and really loves Providence.
Gotcha. So, being a guy that lived a lot, let's bring it back to where were you born and raised?
So I was born in Providence. And then my parents, when I was very young, my parents moved to Pawtucket.
Okay.
And then they moved to North Providence. So I went to elementary school in Pawtucket, and I went to high school in North Providence.
Nice.
And then when I graduated high school, I moved back to Providence. I moved to Washington Park. And I kind of bounced around a little bit. I was taking classes in college and working, and I opened up a small business on Broad Street.
Okay.
A graphic design business.
Oh, nice.
That turned into a printing business. And I had a lot of clients on the south side and downtown. And I did that for a lot of my 20s, and that kind of evolved. At the time, I was doing a lot of writing. And I was working for a newspaper as their graphic designer. And the editor of the newspaper was this really experienced journalist from the Dominican Republic. And he really mentored me on becoming a much better writer. So I used to write a lot in Spanish. And I ended up creating a magazine. I mean, this is the 90s before the internet, right? So I had like an entertainment magazine that advertised all the upcoming shows in the nightclubs and advertised like a lot of local businesses on the south side. And really, part of it was because I love to write, and part of it was because I could get in to see all the bands for free.
Right.
And get like complimentary drinks and stuff. I was like in my early 20s, and we had a blast. So it was a lot of fun. It was called Revista Caché. It was in Spanish.
Okay.
And that really got me into doing a lot more writing, and I went to work after that. I went to work for a restaurant management company as their marketing director. And they had a group of restaurants. They had like 6 restaurants.
Were you doing like flyers and design work for them previously, and they asked you to?
No. I actually just applied for this job.
Oh, wow.
And I was doing a lot of writing and some graphic design for them. And that kind of evolved into getting a job at Neighborhood Health Plan of Rhode Island as their communications manager.
Wow.
And that was a lot more structured because that was like a real company, a health insurance company.
Right.
And that was a real learning experience. It was a pivotal moment in my life because there I had to sit through all these meetings with medical professionals and really kind of turn that language that they speak, that specific medical jargon, I had to turn it into a 5th or 6th grade reading level for the membership.
Right.
In their literature, in their member newsletter, in the flyers and letters that people got at home.
Well, that's like worth its weight in gold, right? Like being able to articulate maybe a higher level of verbiage and break it down to bite-sized pieces that everyone can be familiar with and everyone understands.
Yeah, and I, in a way, it's kind of a continuity of my work when I worked with the newspaper, because that's what a journalist has to do, right? To simplify complicated concepts. Mm-hmm. And when I was at Neighborhood, I was there for about 2.5 years, and that was a really rewarding job. And Neighborhood nowadays is a big insurance company. Back then, it was a startup. It was small. I think
wow.
Now they have like 300,000 members. Back
Right.
then, they had 18,000 members, 17,000 members. It was really small, and it was really wild because since the organization was smaller, you had the opportunity to be really involved in different aspects. When companies get big, every department gets highly specialized. But when it's still a small startup, people are kind of doing like 6 different things at the same time. And I was young, and it was like this unbelievable learning experience that I had that I never would have imagined, because just 2.5 years earlier, I was on Broad Street making flyers for people.
Right. Yeah.
So that was quite a leap.
Right.
Right.
And I'm also like very familiar with the nightlife. I actually have my own event business, LLC, and I promote it on Broad Street and things of that nature. And one thing about that I can say is, nightlife is sometimes it kind of gets like a bad rep. But if you're in it, that also means that you're able to, one, articulate to a vast, demographic or different personalities. You get to rub shoulders, shake hands with a lot of people.
Yep.
And then, you become kind of fearless to, I wonder if this person's going to reject me. I wonder if this person is going to talk bad about me. You kind of grow a thick skin.
Yeah. And I think, even when we talk about the context of the city economy, nightlife is incredibly important. And as an economic sector, as a job generator, when you go into a club and there are, 20, 30 people working there, there's 20, 30 families that are eating from the success of that club. In addition to whatever money the owner's making and the promoters are making, you have security staff, bar staff, wait staff, all types of people. And the other aspect of nightlife that is really fascinating to me is people are incredibly discerning about how they spend their money on entertainment because it's not a necessity. Like we need to eat, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to buy food.
Right.
And you're going to buy food wherever you can find food. And you might have some favorite places that you go to, but at the end of the day, you need to buy food, right? You don't need to entertain yourself.
Correct.
That it's a luxury in a way.
Right.
And so people are very discerning about how they spend this disposable income on a luxury item like entertainment. So when you're successful at it, it's really amazing because people could choose to spend their money 1,000 different ways and they're choosing to spend it with you.
Right.
And I think that's remarkable. And that's, I got to experience that both when I have the printing and graphics business, also when I had the magazine, because almost all the advertisers in my magazine, again, this was before the internet. Now, people just blow up Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok. Back then, like people would put ads in magazines.
Yeah, it was a lot of footwork.
Yeah, it was a lot of footwork. It was a lot of footwork. As a matter of fact, the magazine was a time saver for promoters because they could either pay kids to go around and put up posters everywhere and hand out flyers everywhere, or they could just put an ad in a magazine that 3,000 people were going to see.
Wow.
It was at different times. It seems like it wasn't that long ago, but it seems like a lifetime ago.
Yeah. So, you're working at a neighborhood health plan, and now how do you jump into the political stratosphere from there?
So my whole adult life, I have been really focused towards public service and service in general. My parents are immigrants from Colombia. They came in 1967, and they worked in factories until they retired. But they were always very, very much community minded. And even though we didn't have a lot growing up, like my mom, she would always have like a stash of clothes, a stash of dry food to give to people if they needed stuff. She'd always like go to the store and if there were like sneakers on sale, like she'd buy me a pair of sneakers and then she'd buy like 4 more pairs in different sizes because in case there was somebody, that had a kid that needed sneakers.
So she didn't even have anyone in mind, just in case the occasion comes up.
So like the basement and the attic in our house was like a warehouse for stuff, right? And and she didn't make a lot of money, but that was her way of like being charitable, right? And it was amazing because there was always somebody who needed something, either in our neighborhood or wherever. And so they really kind of ingrained that sense of service in me. So I got really involved. I started when I was 19. When I moved to Providence at age 19, I started getting involved in the neighborhood. I started getting involved in community organizations. I got involved with DARE. I got involved with a Dominican organization called Quisqueya in Action. And I got involved with an organization that was called Greater Elmwood Neighborhood Services that developed affordable housing. They would buy burnt down homes and buildings and redo them. Mm-hmm. That organization was later acquired by One Neighborhood Builders, which still exists to this day and does that work in most of Providence. So that community involvement led naturally to getting involved in politics because people were starting to pay attention in politics. And if you know anything about the South Side, you know that the community is primarily Dominican, and Dominicans, like, politics is like baseball to them. Like, Dominicans are obsessed with politics. They love it. They bring it it's in their blood. And so people started getting really involved in the neighborhood. It was the early to mid 90s. And there was a lot of concern about about things that were happening. We talk about affordable housing now. That same conversation was happening then. The difference was that people relatively had more stable jobs and made a little bit more money. But there was a challenge of affordable housing. There was a lot of interest in people becoming homeowners, because back then a lot of people did not own their own home. Most people were renters. There was a lot of issue of police misconduct. This is before smartphones and the internet. It was your word against the police officer's word.
And this is in the early 90s.
Yeah, and there were a lot of police officers. There were a lot of police officers that had been on the force for 20 years. They had been since the 70s on the force. And they had a very different way of approaching minority communities, particularly black and brown people. And, it was a different time. So I got really involved. And in 2002, David Cicilline, who was a state representative, who I had worked for on a part-time basis, and who I had started volunteering for when he ran for state representative, he decided in 2002 to run for mayor. And so I got involved. And since I had a lot of relationships on the South Side, I was one of his top field coordinators for the South Side. And we spent a lot of time working on that, and he won.
And, that's a big name,
Yeah.
That's a name that kind of rings bells. So
how
was that, just being a part of that?
I mean, it was fascinating. Like I had known him since I was really young. Like, I worked for a time in their law office, and I didn't have a glamorous job. I was like the office gopher. Again, this is like before email. So like if they had all their briefs that they had to submit to the courts, they needed somebody to go drop them off at the courts, right? So I was like, all right, I'll go drop them off. Or if they needed somebody to translate for a client who didn't speak English, it was kind of like, it was like a fun job for a kid that still didn't know what they wanted to do in life. There was a lot of action. It paid good. It was very flexible. The hours were flexible. I could basically take vacation time whenever I wanted. It was great. But what that served me was it opened the door for me to understand the value of politics. He was running for state representative on the East Side in a neighborhood that was night and day compared to where I lived.
Right.
It was a wealthy, mostly white neighborhood with people who didn't have any of the same concerns that people in the hood had. They were concerned with good government. They wanted transparent, ethical, honest government. They wanted, they were pro-choice, 25 years ago when nobody was really talking about that. They had a very different sets of concerns because for the most part, they were doing well, and they are doing well. They're doing very well. And that really opened my eyes to the real diversity of our city. Because up until then, diversity to me meant, here are the Latinos, here are the African Americans, here are the Southeast Asians, here are the white people. And then when you're young and you start to realize that there's also a lot of economic diversity within a small city, you start to better understand the dynamic of how things work and how political pressure is tied to economic mobility. Folks who have a lot of money, not coincidentally, coincidentally also have a lot of influence. They have more relationships with other people who have money, and people who have money hang out with people who have power. And so they end up having a lot more influence than working class folks on the south side of Providence.
Yeah, and just greater resources all around, right?
Yeah.
Is it kind of shocking to you to see all the support that you've been getting? Because, up until I would say a year and a half ago, I wouldn't really be familiar with who you were. And now it's like I see your face everywhere. I see your name everywhere. Does it kind of, take you by surprise sometimes when you're just driving around and you're like, wow, that's me. Wow, that's me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. Look, I've been involved in politics and community organizing my whole life, right? I'm 48, so I've been almost 30 years, 29 years I've been involved since I was 19. And over those years, I've built a lot of relationships. But time goes by and new people come up. Your generation, there's no reason why people in your generation should know who I am based on work that I did 15 or 20 years ago. So you were little kids 15 or 20 years ago. That's kind of irrelevant to your reality. But what ends up happening is that I quit my job at the end of 2020. I was Deputy Secretary of State for the state of Rhode Island. And I quit my job to focus on the campaign. And at the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021, most people weren't really paying attention to the campaign. So the initial part of the campaign is just going on a listening tour of the city and reconnecting with people that I haven't seen in a long time, meeting new younger people who have no idea who I am, getting to know them, letting them get to know me, let them ask me 1,000 questions, and just have endless meetings. So I literally spent like 8 months where all I did was meet with like 15 people a day.
Wow.
And just talk and listen, and do more listening than talking. And a lot of people were like, why are you doing that? You know, the election isn't for another year and a half and nobody's really paying attention. But it's like everything else. It's just like marketing. It's just like promotions. It's like everything else. Relationships, you can't build relationships or strengthen relationships overnight. It takes time. You know, it takes time. You have to build trust. You have to have empathy. You have to have something that connects people. And so what ended up happening was, for a very long time, I was kind of doing that circuit and reconnecting with validators. So people who knew me from 10, 15, 20 years ago, people who know my work, who could validate to the younger folks who have no idea who I am. No, this guy's the real deal. This guy's, you know, he's not pretending. He's not being performative. He actually has done these 10 different things over the years. And, you know, and what happens is, the idea is that over time you start to build that wave silently, so that when people start paying attention to the elections, when they start paying attention, everything starts to come together. And that was basically the plan, and that's how things have been working out. And to answer your original question, yeah, sometimes it's surprising. Like, so we have our little lawn signs, like our little political signs that just have my logo on it. But then we have these big signs that have my picture on it. And it freaks me out to see my picture on it. And it really freaks me out when you're driving down the streets in all these neighborhoods and there's like all these buildings and houses. You have no idea who that is. Right? It's not like it's my cousin or my friend or Andy.
It's actual
or
supporters.
It's random supporters who I have no idea who they are. And they support me so much that they're willing to put a huge sign with my picture on it on their house. And that to me is, you know, it's really humbling, and it's, you know, it's a little bit scary sometimes, but it's also, it reminds me of the seriousness and the commitment. You know, people, they don't believe in me because they think I'm a nice guy. They believe in me because they share my values and my vision. And that is a big commitment for me to say, I can't let these people down. You know,
so like you said, you know, some of my viewership might be early 20s to like, you know, early 30s, might not be too familiar with, you know, your accolades. Do you mind like running down maybe just, you know, 3 to 5 top accolades that, you know, that you have?
Yeah. So, I mean, so basically for the last, probably the last 18 years, I've been full in public administration. My most recent job, I was Deputy Secretary of State. I was the number 2 person to the Secretary of State, Nelly Gorbea, who's running for governor right now. And in that job, I had to oversee a lot of political relationships, manage the office staff. But the critical piece of that job was managing her legislative initiatives. So the Secretary of State's office doesn't have a lot of power. And when that office wants to get something done, they have to pass laws through the legislature, through the Senate and the House in Rhode Island. And that is challenging because that office, because it doesn't have a lot of power, it doesn't have a lot of resources, you really have to be very creative about managing relationships with the legislature in order to line people up and, you know, mobilize citizens, get people in the community, get people all over the state engaged so that they generate energy around an initiative that you want to get passed. And I was responsible for that. That was my job. And the secretary had a very bold package to expand voter rights, to strengthen lobbying laws, to make sure that people weren't, you know, passing money around without it being registered. And a lot at the beginning, those initiatives were there was a lot of pushback. People were like, oh, we don't want to go there. We don't want to do that. But we were able to navigate that process and be successful and get a lot of that done. I'm very proud of the time that I spent working with the Secretary of State. And I'm very proud that not only did we have like that internal political success, but externally, we were able to really promote civic engagement and get younger people involved and get people who otherwise wouldn't get involved. Like I'll give you something as basic as this, a simple example. For if the legislature has a committee hearing on a topic that you care about, something that's going to impact you or your business or your family, they have these hearings that last forever. and they go on into the night. And a lot of families can't go because they don't have childcare. Well, the Secretary of State's office opened up the state library and made arrangements with an organization so that people could go with their kids. And when they were going to go testify, they could leave their kids with a real child care provider in the state library who was being supervised in a safe environment. And, that's that sort of flexibility. That's one very small example of a lot of different things that went on. But it's trying to make government work for people. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, I had been the chief of staff to Mayor Angel Taveras, right? And prior to working for Angel Taveras, when I was younger, I was director of communications for Mayor David Cicilline. When he became mayor, he hired me to be his communications director. Wow. And I spent 8 years working with him. And at the end of those 8 years, I ran for city council in Elmwood and Washington Park, which is Ward 9 on the south side. Mm-hmm. And I got beat. I got beat pretty good. And that was like a real learning experience. It was a teachable moment because, sometimes you can check off all the boxes, but things just aren't for you. And you have to realize that they just aren't for you at that moment,
I can agree with that. And, a certain thing about this podcast is we talk about the highlights, but we also talk about the setbacks and maybe the failures. So like you just mentioned, not winning that election, that might have been a setback, but what other setbacks or what other failures in your life can you mention that made you a better man today?
Well, I think we've had a lot. I think all of us have gone through a lot, particularly those of us who grew up in poverty or near poverty. We have a lot of setbacks, but those setbacks make you stronger. They make you more innovative and more resourceful. And I'm really appreciative of that. But I had challenges, when I graduated from high school, I was taking classes and I wasn't really crazy about college. And, I was taking classes at CCRI, then I tried out RIC, and then, I kind of bounced around and got a couple of good jobs and then opened up business and then was doing a lot of entrepreneurial things like freelancing as a graphic designer and all these things. And I kind of put school aside and years went by and then I would go back and take a few more classes and then, and I think that one of the setbacks that I had was that I didn't really take my educational career very seriously at the time. I was involved in a lot of things. I was involved in a lot of community activism. I was involved with a whole bunch of different business ventures, and I was busy, and I was excited. And part of me was like, I don't need to go to school because I'm doing really good, and I'm doing everything that I love. But as time goes by, you begin to feel like a heaviness. You're like, hey, what's going on? That's kind of a part of me that I need to wrap up. Mm-hmm. And I have 2 kids now. Both of them are in their 20s. My daughter just graduated from college this year at UConn, and my son graduated about 5 or 6 years ago. And I always set an example to them. And when my daughter went off to high school, when she finished high school and went off to college, I was just probably 12 or 15 credits short of my bachelor's degree. And I was like, yo, what am I doing? My daughter is going to graduate before me. So I ended up going back to school and I finished my degree only because I was like,
no way my daughter's going to finish before me. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I was like, what kind of an example am I setting for my kid that she's, you know what I mean?
Right.
But, those are all learning experience. I don't regret the trajectory that my life has taken. And I'm not ashamed, who knows where I would have ended up. I know I've reconnected with friends that I went to high school with and some of them are doing really great and others are doing okay. And by comparison, I've done pretty well, and so I don't really have any regrets about that. But I do realize that sometimes we're good at complicating our own lives, man. Sometimes we're really good at it.
That's very true.
It's like this is the easy path. This is the hard path. And we're like, I think I'll take the hard path.
Right. No, that happens a lot. And, listening to your story, I do think that you were very passionate about the entrepreneur stuff that you were doing. So
I even opened up a cell phone store in Attleboro, which I owned for about 5 months. Wow. And ended up having to close down because that was right before they were privatizing all the cell phone stores. So before your time, right, in the late 90s and early 2000s, you could open up a cell phone store and be a reseller. And you could make enough commission both on the sale of the phones and of the monthly plan that the store could make money. And what happened was all the phone companies said, why are we paying all these little mom and pop places to make money off of our service? And what they did was they opened up their own stores in malls, and they put all the mom and pop shops out of business because they started reducing the amount you could make as profit. And so like I opened up this cell phone store like in 98, and it was just when they were starting to cut back on the profit sharing because they were opening up their own stores. And basically now almost all cell phone stores, and when you see an independent mom and pop cell phone store, they're making their money from repairs and accessories. They're not really making money from selling the service. But back then you could actually make money from selling the service. And so like these, these are just a lot of different things that I was involved in at the time. And it was a lot of fun, and, and we made a few dollars. We were okay. Right?
That's cool. So now I'm going to get into some of the questions, some of the political questions that, I wanted to ask you personally. The 100+ teacher vacancies going on right now in Providence, what are the factors that you believe caused it, and how do you think that we're going to triumph through this?
Yeah. So I will tell you this. Look, my wife is a teacher in the Pawtucket public school system. She's been a teacher for 20 plus years. She's taught in charter schools and public schools everywhere. And last year I had the opportunity to be a substitute teacher at Mount Pleasant. Not for a long time, for about a month. I just wanted to get a feel for what it was like to be in that environment. And I will tell you this, from listening to friends who are teachers, from listening to my wife, and from actually experiencing for a very limited period of time being inside Mount Pleasant High School, our teachers have gotten beat up really bad, particularly in Providence, for a number of reasons. First, the pandemic was a real tough toll on all teachers. Setting up remote learning, having hybrid learning, being responsible for a bunch of kids that are in their house, sometimes unsupervised. It was really stressful. And then the takeover of the Providence schools by the State Department of Education has generated a lot of turmoil and a lot of uncertainty. And so teachers are really burnt out. And then when you hear political conversations, a lot of people blame teachers for everything. Oh, the teachers are greedy. The teachers don't care about kids. The teachers, all they want to do is work to get a pension. They really attack teachers. And the fact is that teachers don't make a lot of money. I always use this kind of sad but remarkable example. My wife has been a teacher for 20 plus years. When our son graduated from URI, he had a degree in business administration, and he got hired by a company with zero experience, making $5,000 less than my wife made with 20 years of experience as a teacher. And you think about that, like he was just as old as her experience being a teacher, and he had zero experience, and he was going to start at an entry-level job making basically what she makes.
Right.
And then, I think that another challenge that we have is that we don't realize that we have a lot of talent in our schools. A Providence teacher can be in a failing school, and they quit today, and tomorrow they have offers from East Greenwich, they have offers from Warwick, they have offers from Cranston, they have offers from high-performing districts.
Is the mindset because if they can deal with Providence kids and everything else is kind
of
well,
yeah, because I think when you hear educators from all over the state, they're like, look, if you can navigate the difficulties of Providence and have all the certifications and have all the training and survive in that world, then any other environment is going to be a piece of cake.
Right.
And so we lose super qualified teachers to other departments where they're going to go and they're going to have less stress and they're not going to be called out, So I think we need to change that learning environment. And that doesn't mean, like, there's enough blame to go around. You know what I mean? Like, we have systemic failures. We have political failures. We have some teachers that are not doing a good job. We have families that aren't engaged for a number of reasons, usually because they're busy surviving. There's enough blame to go around for everybody, for the politicians, for the educators, for the system. But I think that the reason why we have such a high level of vacancies is that there's no incentive to come work to Providence. you know? So new people are like, I can get a job in Coventry or I can get a job in Providence. And in Providence, there's all this turmoil happening. And in Coventry, I just show up and do my job.
Right.
You know what I mean? So they're choosing to go somewhere else. I think we can change that. I have a plan to revamp education in Providence. It's on my website. You can check that out. It's a pretty comprehensive plan. And, you know, that environment makes a huge difference. You know, the two of the biggest factors that influence a child's ability to learn is, one, having adults that they feel care about them and are interested in them. And two, making sure that what they're learning, the content they're learning, is relevant to their real life experience, right? Those are the two of the biggest factors. And who is the adult that a child has most contact with? Is the teacher. So if your teacher is burnt out, or your teacher doesn't care, or if your teacher is angry or upset or stressed out, they're not going to be able to build that type of relationship with the child.
Right.
And then that affects the child's ability to learn, you know? So we absolutely have to change that.
Now, this might seem a little funny, but I have to ask you your thoughts on Senator Mack and the twerking that she was doing and posting. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'll tell you something. Senator Mack Tiara, she's a friend and a supporter, and I'm a big supporter of hers. And she is a very powerful voice in the Senate. And she's a very strong, powerful black woman, and I'm a big fan of hers. The twerking thing, look, I'm an old man. I don't get half the stuff that happens on TikTok, right? Like, it's cool. It's cool. That's like a generational thing. I think what happens is a lot of people who reacted weren't even her constituents. They're not folks who know her. They're national, angry, racist, old people who latched onto that as an easy target to attack her. You know, and I think that's unfortunate, because I think, you know, the fact that I mean, she wasn't twerking at the State House in the middle of session. She was twerking on the beach on a day off. You know, like, come on, you know, it's not that serious. You know, so I'm a big supporter of hers, and I'm supporting her reelection, and she has endorsed me for mayor, and I'm very proud of her endorsement. And I look forward to working with her, me as mayor and her as senator, to get a lot of stuff done for Providence. You know, she represents a really important part of Providence. She represents part of the Mount Hope neighborhood and a big chunk of the South Side. That's a really important part of the city. Right. You know, that's a city, that's a big black and brown chunk of Providence. 100%. You know, and she's a really, really bright person, and she's really vested in the work, and I'm excited to see her get reelected.
And now, speaking of endorsing, this might be difficult for you to answer, but I figure I'd throw it at you. Alorza endorsed you.
Yes.
And now someone like me who isn't that politically savvy would think that he would endorse, you know, his chief operating officer at one point, which he's not. He's endorsing you. What characteristics, you know, do you think that you've shown him to have him pick you over somebody else?
Well, you know, we spoke at the beginning about my experience and my trajectory being involved in politics and community organizing and community activism, and how that predates a lot of people of your generation. Well, Alorza is only a couple of years younger than me, and I've known him for 20 plus years. And he knows what I've done. You know, he knows the work that I've done for the community. He knows the work that I've done organizing people, not only in Providence, but, you know, in Pawtucket and Central Falls, helping black and brown people get elected all over the place, helping black and brown people become involved with business, with having a voice in these processes that happen. He's aware of that work. He knows, right? He knows who I am. He knows what I'm made of. And I think that you know, that's what he took into consideration. You know, he knows I have the actual executive experience, having been chief of staff to Angel, chief of staff to Nelly, and he knows that I know the city well. And I think that combination is what led him to decide, you know, to endorse me. I did not ask for that endorsement. He interviewed the three of us, and he was very clear. He's like, I'm going to decide who I choose. And that's it. You know, we had a nice conversation. He had the same conversation with Nerva and with Brett. And he's worked with Nerva and Brett. He worked with Brett in his administration, and he worked with Nerva as a councilwoman while he was mayor. And he came to the conclusion that I was the best option for the city. And, you know, I'm proud of that endorsement. You know, it means a lot to me. And I plan on leveraging that endorsement just like I have a lot of other endorsements. You know, I've built the broadest coalition of support in this race and in a very long time. You know, when you have somebody like Senator Mack, who's a very progressive, outspoken, strong black woman, and in that same group of people that support me, you have people like Senator Mary Ellen Goodwin, who's a more moderate, more conservative senator from Smith Hill, and a variety of elected officials and community leaders from all over the city. You know, Mary Kay Harris from the South Side, the councilwoman, she's a big supporter of mine. You know, I'm very proud of that broad coalition. And I think what that demonstrates is that I have the ability to bring people together around issues that are important. And that is more important than having been somebody's chief operating officer or whatever, because at the end of the day, the job of the mayor is to be a convener, is to say, look, this is a direction we're heading in, and this is how we're going to get there. If all you can do is point your finger and say, we're going in this direction, but you don't know how to bring people together to make it happen, there's no value in that.
Right.
The value is in bringing people together who maybe have different ways of thinking, who have different ideas about stuff, you know?
Wow. So we're looking at a recession, you know, in the nation, in America. What can you or what will you do if elected to help us through that recession? And after it kind of fades away, what can we do to kind of get things back on track?
So there are two things to deal with the recession specifically. There are two areas where we can have a significant impact. One is localized economic development, and the other one is housing development. And I'll get to both of them. First, localized economic development. For years, the city of Providence has chased big fish when it comes to economic development. We're trying to get Amazon here. We're trying to get PayPal here. We're trying to get somebody to fix the Superman building. We're trying to, like, these big projects, right, hoping that if somebody comes in and invests $100 million, and that money is going to trickle down and help our local economy. That model hasn't really worked, and it hasn't really worked for a number of reasons. What I want to do as part of my economic development plan is, we need to have a solid economic development plan for the downtown, but we need to have a regionalized economic development plan. We have neighborhood commercial districts that used to be thriving 10, 20 years ago and have been dying. You look at Cranston Street, Smith Street, Charles Street, and think about this. Most of these commercial districts are gateways to communities where families have more disposable income. The perfect example is Charles Street. If you turn on Branch Avenue onto Charles Street and you drive, it's like 2 miles to the line with North Providence, right? Mm-hmm. Most of that is just like little bodegas and hair salons. Right. Very few. There's a whole bunch of empty storefronts. There's just a whole bunch of houses. Think about this. The median income in North Providence is like 20% higher than Providence. That means those families in North Providence, they have a little bit more money to spend on stuff, on entertainment, like we talked about at the beginning. If you drive another 2 miles, you go into Lincoln, their median income is like 70% higher than Providence. So we have an opportunity to say, look, we're going to invest in Charles Street. We're going to make those final 2 miles of Charles Street heading north, we're going to make them beautiful. We're going to fix it up, and we're going to help small businesses grow there so that you can have shops, boutiques, bars, restaurants. And what's going to happen with that is going to create jobs for Providence, opportunities for Providence business people, hopefully BIPOC business people, taxes for Providence, and it's going to attract people from North Providence and Lincoln who are going to say, I don't know about going to Federal Hill or downtown because it's parking and it's a pain in the butt, but I'll go to Charles Street to a nice restaurant. You know what I mean? Same thing happens with Cranston Street. You know, Cranston is a more affluent community, and that last stretch south between Union Avenue and Route 10, where you cross into Cranston Street, where the Cranston police is, that's like a dead zone. It's a complete dead zone. There's an opportunity for us to revitalize that, to turn that into a gateway, you know. And we want to be careful. We don't want to displace the people that live there. We don't want to displace the existing businesses there. But we can make significant investments in those areas, you know. And I feel the same way about Smith Street and North Main Street. There's all these opportunities to really invest in our commercial corridors. That's going to generate, not only generate economic activity, but it helps create wealth in our families. You know, it helps small business people grow. The other aspect of that is housing. So about 2 weeks ago, I rolled out my housing plan. And one of the models that I want to have is the municipal developer model. So we have all these agencies in city government that control different aspects of development. There's one agency called the Providence Redevelopment Agency, and their job is to buy lots and burnt down houses and ruined buildings and redevelop it, whether they pay for somebody to redevelop it or they sell it to somebody who's going to redevelop it, right? And that agency has the ability to borrow money on its own, like millions of dollars. It has the ability to take properties by eminent domain, which is to say, we're going to take this property and we're going to give you what it's worth, and we don't care if you were selling it or not selling it. It has a lot of power, right? We have the Providence Housing Authority, which manages all like our big high rises with public housing. We have the planning department that controls community development block grant, which is this money that comes from Washington to invest in communities. We have all these resources. We can start building tomorrow. Housing. Now, I'm not just talking about low-income affordable housing. I'm talking about across the board, market rate housing, opportunities for home ownership opportunities or rental opportunities, subsidized housing for low-income people across the board. We're seeing this happen in Maryland. They're doing it in Maryland in a place that has a very similar model in Providence. They're doing it. And why does this protect against recession? Because if we just leave it up to the private market to develop housing, when the economy's on fire and home values are going up, they're building housing like crazy. And then when the economy crashes, they stop building houses, right? If we transition to a municipal developer model where we're funding this with CDBG, with federal funds, we're funding it with state housing funds, we're funding it with Affordable Housing Trust, which goes through the Providence Redevelopment Agency, we can map out development over a 5-year period and say, look, over the next 5 years, we're going to build 2,000 houses. We're going to build 400 houses a year. And we have the financing lined up. We have the institutions lined up. We have the developers that are going to do it, whether it's a private developer for profit, you know, or it's a nonprofit developer like One Neighborhood Builders. And we can map out and we can have consistent construction jobs over 5 years, regardless of what the economy looks like. If the economy's on fire, if the economy hits the tank, and what's that doing? It's putting money on the street. It's creating jobs. It's generating taxes. It's creating opportunities for many of our BIPOC contractors that have been sidelined for years, you know. And that's how you protect against a recession, through those ways, through localized economic development and through consistent homeownership opportunities.
And I think, you know, we definitely need that. We were ranked dead last in new builds. And, you know, 75% of the new builds in Rhode Island were single family, AKA, you know, more on the outskirts, more on the rural and suburban areas, when, you know, rent right now is going through the roof. And
one of the challenges that we've had in the city is that for years we kept changing the zoning laws to make them tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, to the point where a lot of people. So you go into like South Side or Washington Park, and you see the street that has like 4 triple deckers, and then there's an empty lot, and somebody would just build a 1-family house, because if you build a 1-family house, you don't have as many restrictions through zoning as if you build a multi-family house. So you see like triple decker, 1-family house. And then every time there was a lot, they were putting up 1-family houses. Now they're putting up a lot of 2-family houses. We should be building 3 and 4-family houses, right? But the city, through the zoning laws, has made it really hard for people to build multi-unit houses. So they were just doing whatever they could do quickly to flip it and make some money. We have to change our zoning laws too to make it easier to build multi-unit and affordable housing. That's another area that we can change almost immediately.
And you know, it seems that crime, and especially youth crime, has kind of gone up over the last, you know, 3, 4, 5 years. What do you plan on doing in terms of youth programs and, you know, trying to keep kids off of the street?
So I think there are a lot of different opportunities. You know, as part of my plan to revamp our education system, we need to think of our schools as hubs that work before and after school, providing alternatives for kids, right? That's one thing. Programming, expand programming. You know, we have PASA, which is an after-school alliance. We need to figure out how to strengthen that and make it relevant to kids. Like I said earlier, you know, education is only valuable if it's relevant to the kid's life experience. If you're trying to teach them something that they can't connect to the real world, they're like, I'm wasting my time. So we have to make those activities relevant too, right? Something that they want to do. The other thing I want to do is our recreation centers have very limited programming. A few of them have great programming, but most of them just have like basketball, or they have a pool in the summertime. And I think we need to activate those spaces, and we need to generate activities. We should be teaching coding to kids. We should have classes on basic finance to teach kids, you know, the concepts of investing, the concepts of savings, so that when they are working and they can make a few dollars, they know how to manage their money well. Nobody teaches you that. Nobody taught me that. You know,
Right.
You know, there's an opportunity for that. The other thing I want to do is the mayor has a summer jobs program that hires 900 kids every summer and pays them $15 an hour, which is great. And you send them to work at companies, at organizations, wherever.
Wow.
We need to expand that program. That program needs to be year-round. I want opportunities for kids, because you know what happens? Here's the reality. Look, I grew up poor. And in my family, you know, we had kids that grew up and got into the hustle, and they got in trouble and they got locked up. And, you know, when kids start down that road of breaking the law, nobody dreams of being a gangster. Very few people dream of being a gangster. People are just looking to make a few dollars, and they don't have a lot of options to make a few dollars. And then it kind of snowballs until they lose control of the situation. And the next thing you know, they're committing like serious crimes, right? Or they're walking around with a gun and doing something stupid like that.
Right.
We got to catch these kids. We got to intervene before that snowball grows out of control. And one of the ways we do that is if we create opportunities to give our kids jobs, even if it's just a couple of hours a week, you can make a few dollars, you can learn something, you can feel purposeful, and you get the satisfaction of getting a paycheck. You know what I mean? And then you have a few dollars, you save it up, you get yourself some kicks for $200 or whatever.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there's a sense of accomplishment, right? That's what we have to focus on.
And even
Pride.
just, you know, positive reinforcement that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Right? I
Yeah.
mean,
As opposed to not having any alternative at all, you know?
100%.
And then, you know, I know this, you know, a lot of kids, they get into the hustle because they don't see any alternatives. They can't get a job. Nobody pays attention to them. They're automatically judged because of where they're from or maybe what they look like. You know, we need to break those barriers. And one of the ways we do that is by creating opportunities for kids to understand that they're valuable, they're worthy.
Right.
They're, you know, that we all are, that we all have worth, and that we aren't just like going through the motions of living.
I agree.
But that we're living with purpose, you know? You know, a lot of people who are into like the evangelical space, they always talk about living with purpose, but that fits to anything, man. Like if you're not living with purpose, you're not living. You know what I mean? You're just breathing for tomorrow. You know what I mean? And we need it. Sometimes it takes us years till we're like in our 40s and 50s. Some people never figure out what their purpose is.
Right.
But the sooner that we can get our kids on track to understanding that there's more to life than just existing and waiting for tomorrow and waiting for tomorrow and waiting for tomorrow, but that you can actually have plans and you can have goals and you can work toward those goals. And sometimes you're going to trip up and you're going to screw up and you're going to make stupid decisions and you're going to set yourself back, but you get up and you keep going. When you open up that reality to kids, their possibility is limitless, because every kid has limitless possibilities in their head. You know, when you get to be my age, you start to have a ton of limitations.
Right.
You know what I mean? You know, because you already tried 50 doors and you already realized that 45 of them were closed or whatever. But when you're young, you know, we can't limit our kids' imagination and we can't limit their possibility when they're young. We have to blow that up and we have to say, look, you have the possibility to do whatever you want. You know what I mean? You want to be a performer? Go for it. You want to be a scientist? Go for it. You want to build houses and make $1 zillion building houses? Go for it. You know what I mean? Like, do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I agree. So on this podcast, we have a little section. It's called This or That. So I'm going to say this or that. You give me an answer and maybe a brief description on why you picked that answer. Hot or cold?
Hot.
Just cause?
Because when it's hot, you can do something about it. When it's cold, you got to put on, you got to warm up and you limit yourself.
Okay. Would you rather be loved or respected?
I think if people love you, they respect you automatically. I think it's impossible for you to love someone without respecting them. It's impossible. So I think love brings respect with it automatically. But respect, you can be respected by people who hate you, but they have to respect you because you have a position of authority. But anybody who truly loves you will respect you naturally as part of that love.
Dells or Mr. Lemon?
I will say this, like I like Mr. Lemon a lot, but there's only one Mr. Lemon, and every time you go, there's like 50 people in line. So as much as I love Mr. Lemon, and I think it's a better lemonade, Dells is much more convenient, you know?
Okay. La Roca or La Gran Parada?
I don't know. I'll tell you something. La Roca takes longer because their stuff is made to order most of the time. But La Gran Parada takes a long time too because they have that crazy,
The line's always
that ridiculous line, like, you know, that queue. You got to wait in that queue, right? But I mean, I like them. But I would say if I had to pick one, I would say La Gran Parada. La Gran Parada.
Okay.
And they also make like they also have the sometimes they have like the Jamaican meat pies there.
Right.
That they make in-house, which are pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my good friends is Dominican, and he put me on to all the spots, and
Yeah.
I haven't been able to lose weight since. So
I know that food is killer. It's killer. It's awesome.
Providence College or URI men's basketball?
URI because I know more people that have been to URI
Okay.
than to PC, and there's more opportunity at URI than there is at PC, particularly for black and brown folks.
RI Summers or RI Winners?
Summers all the way. All right,
Summer.
Summers, yeah.
Okay. This last section, I'm gonna have some fire questions for you. What's the first name of two of your best friends? The first name of them?
Andy and Tony.
Andy and Tony. If I was to ask Andy and Tony one thing each from both of them that they believe that you need to improve on, what would they say?
Probably that I can be very demanding sometimes.
And who would say that?
I think they both would say that.
Both would say it. Okay. What's your biggest inspiration?
My parents. My parents are, you know, when you're a kid, you have a really tenuous relationship with your parents because they're always torturing you. But when you get to have your own kids and your own kids grow up, like at my point, like my kids are grown up. Like I went through the whole stage. I went through the baby stage, the little kid stage, the teenager stage, the whole thing, right? With my own kids. And having survived that stage and having two kids that are adults that are doing well in the world, like has given me so much insight into my parents because my parents didn't have a fraction of the opportunities or the resources that I had. And they were able to pull that off in a new place, working in a factory, making pennies. And I'm like that's pretty impressive to me.
I agree. Your top 5 artists that you're currently listening to. I don't know how much music you listen to. I know you're a busy man, but top 5 artists that somebody can catch you listening to.
5. Let me see. I've been listening to. This is gonna sound crazy, but I've been listening to. I listen to a lot of old school salsa from the 90s and 2000s. So like Tito Rojas and Mark Anthony, but like the old Mark Anthony stuff, not like his new ballad stuff, right? And I actually been listening to like a lot of Dua Lipa.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because it clears my head a lot.
Yep.
And that's 3, right?
Yep.
And I listen to a lot of Spanish rock, right? So I listened to a group called Héroes del Silencio that was really big in the 90s. And to another group called Soda Stereo. Those are like the two major groups of Latin rock from the 90s. And I just have like, those are the people that I have on rotation most of the time.
Gotcha.
So unfortunately, I mean, I like contemporary music and I'll listen to it. You know, I'll put it on Spotify and listen to like rap from now, but I can't identify any of the artists. Right. So sometimes a song will come up, and if I'm with my daughter, I'll be like, who sings that? And she's like, oh, this person sings that. I'm like, oh, all right.
Gotcha.
You
know, if you could have lunch with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I think I would like to have lunch with Martin Luther King Jr. Because he was a really complex person. You know, I've had the opportunity to read a lot about him. I've been to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee, and he was a really complex person. You know, he wasn't a saint.
Right.
He was a complicated person. His personality had a ton of layers to it. Fascinating guy, brilliant strategist, brilliant politician, brilliant preacher, had a lot of shortcomings as a man, as an individual, but understood that what he was doing was bigger than a person, bigger than a movement, bigger than anything. Right. And he was like the 20th century. He was like the modern day Gandhi. Right. It transcends Black America. It's like influenced people all over the world. And that wasn't that long ago.
Right.
You know what I mean? That was what, 60 years ago?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's not, we're not talking about ancient history. We're talking about something that, you know, his kids are still alive.
Right.
You know,
right.
That's a big deal.
Lastly, when it's all said and done, what do you want to be remembered as? Or who do you want to be remembered as?
You know, I think that I want to be remembered as somebody who gave my best to improve people's lives at many different levels, whether it was through politics or through service or through volunteering or whatever. I think that's what I would like to be remembered as, somebody who really helped others. You know, and sometimes you can change the world by helping one person, or you can change the world by being in a position to help thousands of people. But one is not more valuable than the other, because that one person that you help in the future could have repercussions that could impact the world. And if you look at it that way, you know, we all have the responsibility to give of ourselves in service to others, whether it means something as basic as helping somebody who's going through a tough time with a few dollars, or making a phone call from somebody who doesn't know how to navigate a government bureaucracy, or getting involved with an organization, getting involved in your neighborhood group, running for office, becoming mayor, becoming a city council person, becoming a rep. Even in the process of running, you're helping other people, you're inspiring people, and you're planting a seed of civic engagement in people. And in this campaign, we've had dozens of people who didn't care about politics, and they've gotten excited about politics, and they've gotten involved, and they're going to stay involved. And it doesn't even matter at this point. It doesn't matter if I become mayor, if I lose, it doesn't matter. Like, those people are engaged. I've changed their life without even setting out to do that. And they're going to stay engaged. And they're going to stay engaged the way I stayed engaged after I first got involved in politics when I was a kid. You know, that's important, because at some point, one of those people is either going to do something to improve our lives, or they're going to inspire somebody else to do something to improve our lives. And, you know, it's kind of like that concept of paying it forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, for the viewership out there, if there's someone going through kind of a hard time right now, just suffered a massive failure, what's something that you can tell them to try to get them back on the right track and to keep pushing forward?
I would say everything in life is about perseverance and resilience. And we use that word a lot. It became like a buzzword, resilience, your ability to bounce back from turmoil, bounce back from disappointment, bounce back from getting your ass kicked, right? But resilience is really what defines people who are successful. People who are successful, you hear the story when somebody makes it. But what you don't hear is that they failed 50 times before they made it. You know what I mean? Very few people hit the lottery. Very few people become famous or successful or rich in one shot. you know, you have a better chance of winning the Powerball than doing that. Most of the people who make it is through perseverance. And I will tell you this, I've got my ass kicked a lot in life. And I've been knocked down and gotten back up and knocked down and gotten back up. And in this race for mayor, a lot of people told me, you can't run. Nobody's going to pay attention to you. You can't raise enough money. You're not going to get people to support you. You're not going to be able to put a team together. Every excuse that people could have not to run. And I said, I'm going to run and I'm going to set a plan. And in that plan, I'm going to have milestones. And every single milestone that I set forth, we have achieved and surpassed. How much money we were going to raise? We said we were going to raise $400,000. We raised $500,000, all in small donations, not from rich people, from regular folks giving me $100, $50, $200, right? I said I was going to put a team together. We put a kick-ass team together. We have the widest coalition of elected officials. I got like 18 elected officials from Providence that are supporting me. Every single goal that we put together, we surpassed, despite the fact that people say, oh, you're not going to accomplish it. And you know what? The last milestone is winning, and we're going to win. And we're going to win big. Even though we've been outspent, and even though the media says, well, you know, the other guy has a lot of money and this and that, and that, doesn't matter. The ground game and the heart game has beat the money game every single time.
Right.
It beat it in 2014, it beat it in 2010, and it beat it in 2002, and it's going to beat it again in 2022.
Well, that does it. I thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you.
It was a great conversation. I
Appreciate
really do appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.